The end of Jesus' time ministering during his life on this earth is almost over. He begins a mission trip with his disciples, heading out of Galilee, going east for a while, and then heading south. Down at the end of that southern road is Jericho. Jericho was not very large. Archaeological digs indicate that it was probably less than a mile across from gate to gate, wall to wall. But it was a very important place, not just for the Romans, not just for the Jews. Each of the dynasties that has come along in history has taken Jericho as an important place. It's the Beverly Hills of Israel. There are springs there. There are pools of water that have mineral characteristics. And it is a rolling hill area where the wealthy would be able to build their mansions and enjoy the luxuries of a quiet life. Jesus comes down and crosses the Jordan at approximately the same place that was crossed prior to attacking Jericho hundreds of years before. This time, there was no attack. Jesus begins walking. He has two contacts to make while he's in Jericho. But today we're only going to look at one because I don't want to keep you here until one. God is never surprised by the present. You'll hear me say that several times this morning. He makes provision way in advance for a need that is still in the future. We sing about Zaccheus. At least when I was in elementary school, we learned the song, Zaccheus was a wee little man. See, you know it too. We sing about Zaccheus, and we kind of make Zaccheus the hero in the story, except that our focus today is not going to be just what Zaccheus did. We're going to look at Zaccheus as a mirror in which we can see Jesus working his kingdom plan. Names. Do you like your name? Names sometimes are a burden. Sometimes they're a blessing. Zaccheus, for instance, means pure, innocent. He was the chief of the tax collectors. Now, the Romans believed that if they could get local people to collect the taxes, they'd get more money that way. And so, periodically, they would put the position of head tax collector up for bid. And the highest bidder, the one who paid the Romans the most for that position, was the winner. So at some point in the past, Zaccheus has given the Romans a lot of money. Now, we're going to look at Zaccheus towards the end of what the Bible tells us about him. Zaccheus is discouraged. Contrary to the common practice of tax collectors, Zaccheus has decided that he is going to charge only what is required. He's not putting any extra in his pockets. And he has told his agents, because he was the chief of the tax collectors, he had many workers in the city of Jericho, and he expected his workers to do the same, charge an honest tax and nothing more. But that wasn't always the way. You see, there's been a change in Zaccheus. He's had a change of heart. Tax collectors were, maybe still are, famed for being greedy. The Romans wanted as much money as they could get from. And they did not care what the tax collectors charged as long as they got their money. There was no oversight. There was just collecting. Now, Zaccheus has been cast out of the Jewish society. Not just one of those little secret room things. Official action has been taken to kick him out. He's not allowed in any of the synagogues. Everybody looks at him with suspicion and distrust because they're working for the Romans. He was an outcast from Jewish society. But Zaccheus wants to belong. And in order to belong, he has heard about this man who preaches inclusion. He wants to see Jesus. He wants to see if it is worth the struggle that he is currently going through. Now, it's not easy to change our ways. The older you get, the harder it is to change our ways. To go to church when we haven't been going is a difficult thing to get into the habit. To be honest when cheating is expected. To be cheerful, helpful, respectful, and obedient when those around you are doing the opposite of each of those. Not only is it hard to change our ways, it's many times harder to change other people's ways. Teachers will tell you that, but not loudly. Opinions are very difficult to change. The tax collectors were cooperating with the invaders, the enemy forces, the infidels. You know, we can say words in a certain way, inflection. We can say words in a certain way that it means the opposite of what the words really mean. And so we could hear people around him saying, Zaccheus is honest, meaning exactly the opposite. We are given the counsel that we should make obedience as easy as possible, and we're going to see that played out today. And that's why Jesus is in Jericho, because he wants to make obedience as easy as possible. News has spread through the city. Jesus is entering through the south gate into Jericho. And because of his popularity or not popularity, everyone wants to see him. Now, this is in terms of the Jewish calendar. We are right before the Passover of Jesus' third year of ministry. This is the last time he's going to go through Jericho on a mission trip. And therefore, the streets are crowded, not just because everyone wants to see Jesus, but because all of the people that have come from the cities beyond the Jordan, and they're coming through Jericho to head up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is only about 18 miles away from Jericho, not a very long walk. So the crowd. Zaccheus went up to the first crowd that he found out there. He closed up his shop and went out into the streets, and he went to the first crowd. Is Jesus here? Is Jesus here? Now, as the song says, Zaccheus was a wee little man, and he was on the outside of this circle around somebody, and he was trying to get through, but nobody would give him up. So nobody would open the way so that he could get through. May that never be said of us. We don't want to prevent other people from seeing Jesus. Now, Zaccheus quickly formed an alternative plan. He knew the city. In his position as tax collector, he had chased reluctant people around the city, trying to make sure that they paid their due tax. So he knew the city. He had not just chased reluctant merchants, he had chased down criminals who were trying to get by without. We call them cheaters today. Now, Jewish men of culture don't run. at least at the time of Jesus. Don't run. But Zaccheus found himself in a position where he had to break those cultural rules because his focus was on Jesus. In his mind, he kept hearing the words, "I must see him and look into his eyes." Side streets, alleys. Zaccheus was running as hard and as fast as he could to try to get to where Jesus was entering Jericho, or where he was leaving Jericho. And actually what happens is that he catches up with Jesus as he is leaving Jericho. He's dodging cats and dogs and kids and laundry that's hanging on lines and fences and branches. And as he does, his milk white legs are flashing in the sun as he pulls his robe up a little bit to run. And people are noticing this. Zaccheus is running crazily along, but we need to look out in the street, and Jesus is not hurrying. Jesus is moving at a slow pace. Now, there are 3 disciples. How many disciples did Jesus have? 12. There were 3 disciples that were out in front of him clearing the way. Make way, make way. Then there was a little gap, and then there were 3 disciples here and 3 disciples here and 3 behind to protect, and he is moving, but he's not moving as fast as his disciples want him to move. And so periodically the 3 up here will stop and look back. You know how they do it. Look back and say, "What's he doing now?" But Jesus knew right where Zaccheus was all of this time. His slow pace and many stops were timed to intersect with a sycamore tree at just the right time. I can imagine that a smile would light up his face. You know, he'd stop and his disciple would, "Come on, we gotta go. We've got 18 miles to get to Jerusalem." And he'd smile and they say, "What in the world is he smiling about?" Well, he was smiling because he knew where Zaccheus was and what Zaccheus was going through as he was trying to get to Jesus. Side streets, back alleys, women and servants hanging clothes out to dry, maybe beating on some rugs. I can imagine that periodically he would hear Zaccheus would hear, "Watch out, where are you going?" And then they start remembering who he is. And so then they would call out, "You don't have enough money already? You got to chase people down, take more? Look at the tax man run. I'll bet you he knows there's some money up ahead." And all of these comments just kind of bounced off Zaccheus and made no impression whatsoever because he was going to find Jesus. By now, the crowd that Zaccheus was looking for is on the main road heading out of town. And Jesus knew all of the time exactly where he was, where Zaccheus was. The timing had to be just right. And so down another side street to the city gate leading out north towards Jerusalem, onto the path where Zaccheus already knew there was a sycamore tree growing beside the wall. Now, we call it a sycamore tree, and if you're from the south and you look around here and you say that's a sycamore tree, it's not the same sycamore, kind of sycamore that's in Israel. This was actually a sycamore fig tree that was relatively small, not going to get 30 feet tall. His rich clothes not regarded, he rushed on, despite his robe being caught and torn on branches and bricks and broken pottery. As quickly as he can, he gets to the tree and he climbs into the tree. He has no experience climbing trees. So he struggles and persists until he sits on the limb that is leaning out over the main road. And he waits. At the city gate, Jesus looks up. Now he could see the tree. He knew it was there, but now he can see the tree. And again, he pauses and smiles. God is never surprised by the needs of the present. Because years ago, a merchant came to Jericho on business, but he arrived in the morning before the gates were opened. He sat down, leaned against the wall, and took out his breakfast: some dry bread and some dried figs. It was a common breakfast for that time. He had not noticed as he was eating, wasn't bright light yet, he had not noticed that one of the figs had fallen off his lap and landed in the dirt. The conditions were just right. And as seeds do, a sprout grew from that fig and matured into a tree big enough so that a small man could climb it and get above the crowd below. Children had climbed the tree many times before, but this was the time for which God had planned that tree. Jesus now knew the time is right. In the tree, Zaccheus is scanning the crowd, looking. He has never seen Jesus. Which one is he? How will I know? There are so many travelers going to pass over. Maybe this is the wrong crowd. But then the crowd stops right under Zaccheus. And a voice says, "Zaccheus?" It was a musical and loving voice, like he was calling out to a longtime friend. And so Zaccheus looks down where the voice came from and into the face of the man calling his name, and he knows instantly that's Jesus. But how did Jesus know my name? He wonders. Jesus paused and smiled again. There's no need for him to hurry now. This, my sheep, was lost, but is now found. It was enough for Zaccheus right there, hearing his name coming from the lips of Jesus with love. It was enough for Zaccheus. Jesus knew him. He could now go on with the struggle of changing and be happy with the challenges. But Jesus wasn't through. That's a key phrase. But Jesus wasn't through. There was more. Again, Jesus speaks. Would you come down here and be with me in the crowd, right here? And he motions beside himself. And Zaccheus falls out of the tree in his hurry to get down there. Wow! The crowd wouldn't make a path for him to get close to Jesus, but now Jesus has made room. Zaccheus was speechless, probably for the first time as a tax collector. But Jesus wasn't through. He had more planned for Zaccheus. And so as Zaccheus gets up and brushes himself off and adjusts his robes, Jesus looks at him and says, "I'm tired. I'm hungry. Can we go to your house?" Double wow. The noise of the crowd is no longer heard. Zaccheus can see and hear only Jesus as they turn and go back into the city. He's afraid that he's dreaming. And so he reaches down so that nobody can see, and he pinches himself. Is this if I can feel it, it's not a dream. The noise of the crowd is no longer heard by Zaccheus. He can only see and hear Jesus. He hears negative comments being said about Jesus, and that was too much for Zaccheus. He doesn't really care what they say about him. He brought them on himself, but not about Jesus. He has to do something. So turning and facing the crowd, he finally finds his voice. Zaccheus declares restitution. Big word, paying back. No repentance is genuine that does not produce change. But Zaccheus is not just giving restitution. He says, half of my goods I give to the poor, and I give 4 times restitution where I may have charged somebody too much. Now, if you're just reading the story and not doing any research, you would think, wow, that's pretty good. But here's the catch on that. This was part of Jewish law. Half of my goods and 4 times was part of Jewish law. That was the decree by a court when a person had purposely overcharged, had purposely stolen from somebody else. Zaccheus basically was saying to the group, I was wrong and I stole your goods, and I'm sorry. And he was giving Jesus credit. This silenced the hypocritical crowd who were not even willing to admit their wrongs, nor even a little bit of restitution. Jesus had not asked Zaccheus to do a thing. He had just accepted him unconditionally, no strings attached. That's what we all want if we're really honest with ourselves, and it's what we all need. Not just from Jesus, but from each other. Unconditional acceptance. Looking into Jesus' face through personal devotions and church services gives us courage to continue. But now, Jesus gives Zaccheus even more. He makes the statement for everyone to hear, today, salvation has come to this house. And turning and looking with a smile at Zaccheus, he says, your sins are forgiven. Only when Jesus is received as a personal Savior does salvation come. Zaccheus is speechless again. He hadn't spoken out loud his plans for a changed life so that Jesus would approve, but Jesus still isn't through. You see, Zaccheus had been an outcast from Jewish society for years. He's been disowned by his brothers. In fact, official, legal court action has been taken to remove his membership from the Jewish community as a descendant of Abraham. He doesn't belong in the present. He has no past, and there is no hope for the future. But Jesus changes that. He reinstates Zaccheus into the family by saying, Zaccheus is truly a son of Abraham. His changed life testifies to that fact. Now, all of those who have accepted Jesus also accept Zaccheus. He has a family again. He knows where he belongs, and he knows what his future is. Jesus always has more planned for us than we can imagine. And Zaccheus became a missionary to the wealthy in Jericho. We have been chosen to be missionaries to Pensacola. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, will draw all men to me. At the foot of the cross, we are all drawn close together into one family. Unconditional acceptance. Let's follow Jesus' example and give this gift to each other, not because we deserve it, but because of Jesus' love for us. Oh, to have the heart of Zaccheus. He shows us how to respond to Jesus' unconditional acceptance. It's called unconditional surrender. May we choose to follow Zaccheus' example. The sycamore tree was not very large. It was a small tree, but it was just right. It was just what Zaccheus needed so that he could see Jesus. Size is not as important as willingness. May this church be a sycamore tree where others will finally look into the face of Jesus and find acceptance and rest. Each of us is like a sycamore tree, planted in just the right place to be useful. Remember, just as surely as there is a place prepared for each one of us in the heavenly mansions, so there is a place for here on this earth where we are to work for God. Missionaries, each of us, not just those that are nominated by the nominating committee, each of us, missionaries. Zaccheus had many problems to overcome, but he refused to let any of them prevent him from seeing Jesus. What a wonderful characteristic for us to adopt. May we be determined to see Jesus and invite him into our hearts and our homes. And now, in keeping with our pastor's pattern at the end of his sermons, I can't do it the way he does it. Does this make sense to you? Is this something that you want for yourself? You can be a Zaccheus today. If you're looking for rest and assurance, you can be Zaccheus today. Jesus is here right now. Reach out to him. Raise your hand and your heart and say, Jesus, I choose you. I invite you into my heart and my home to stay with me. Accept me as your disciple.